column and partner at Freethink. Also with us is Wendy Osefo. She's an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins, and author and host of the Dr. Wendy Show. Thank you both for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, Wendy, let me start with you. Big picture, do you equate the two here? Are you as troubled by the right and the left's comments, more by one or the other? What are your thoughts?
It's not necessarily about whether I'm troubled. It's about looking at the facts of both candidates. Black people, we are not monolithic, so we do not have to think in one way, and we do not all have to agree on the same thing. But when you're looking at your candidates, you have to look at their history. Donald Trump has a pattern and a practice of discriminating against black people. We know in 1973, the Department of Justice, sued him for discriminatory practices. It was proven that he did not want to rent to black people. In 1989, with the Central Park Five, Donald Trump took out an ad and accused 5 black boys of a crime they did not commit and said that he wished that the death penalty was still in effect. And most recently, we saw that in 2017 when Charlottesville happened and there was incidents of racism and we had, people who were outspoken that were white supremacists. He said there's good people on both sides. So my question is not necessarily about equating the two, but if you are a black person, why would you be okay voting for a candidate who has a history of doing things nefariously to people who look like you?
Well, Camille, I think the answer to that could be that not everyone votes necessarily based on sort of what is best for their race or their religion, et cetera. I don't know. What do you make of that?
I'd say that that's probably true. I would also suggest that some of the things that were just suggested are not, in fact, accurate. For example, the very fine people on both sides thing has been pretty thoroughly debunked. I think the then President Trump was very clear when he said explicitly that excludes people who are white supremacists or white nationalists. But at any rate, I think we could talk specifically about the fact that we are seeing race play a pretty prominent role here in the election. And as you mentioned, Dan, the reality is that Joe Biden actually helped to inject a lot of this into this particular race. Right now, when he, more than 2-3 months before nominating Kamala Harris, said first that he was going to make sure that he nominated a woman to be his vice president, and then said explicitly that it was going to be a black woman. If you know that the vice presidential pick is going to be someone who happens to be a black woman long before they're selected, that suggests a person and a party that is prioritizing race as a kind of criteria, as a litmus test for whether or not someone is suitable to occupy this particular office. Now, my own perspective on this is very simple. Either you have the character and the qualifications to fill the role, or you do not. And whether or not you happen to be black or anything else ought to be beside the point, and we ought to be consistent in that. So I do agree that in general, it is best to focus on people's qualifications. I do agree that Republicans are making a mistake by focusing on this quote unquote DEI candidate angle. But it is also imperative to acknowledge that Democrats actually helped to bring this issue to the fore. And people like Joy Reid, who are consistently calling into question people's authentic blackness on account of whether or not they support her preferred candidate, those people ought to answer the criticism that I think is being fairly directed.
Let Wendy respond.
Is someone, well, please.
Yeah, Wendy, go ahead.
I think if it's being called into question whether or not, Vice President Kamala Harris is qualified, because you mentioned that prior to her pick, President Joe Biden stated that he will pick a woman and he will pick a woman of color, and you feel as though that undermines her qualifications. Well, my question is, what qualifications does Donald Trump have to be the President of the United States? If Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, then if we're being very honest, Donald Trump is a hire of white privilege, because he's not qualified to sit at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. He does not have the qualifications to be the President of the United States. And to be quite honest, Kamala Harris is overqualified to have her position. And so I think that this question of whether or not she should be situated there doesn't make any sense. I'll let you finish.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, finish. Yep, sorry.
No, I was saying, one cannot be true and the other not true. So let's just be very clear when we're making those comments.
Camille, go ahead, respond.
I didn't introduce that binary. What I said was Joe Biden established a litmus test for his vice presidential pick. He insisted that it had to be a person of a particular race and of a particular gender. That is introducing the issue of race and gender into this race.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com.